every organization today is collecting data. They need data. They need evidence in one way or the other. For example, for us in the media, we make actual visits to viewers and listeners, and sometimes send messages or call them with questions. Now, how much do you know about data and its use? Hello and welcome to the Real Talk. Did you have a good week? Thank you so much for sparing time to join us. My name is Jackie Lumbasi, and our guest today is Mariam Ibrahim from Development Initiatives. Mariam, thank you for honoring our invitation.
Thank you, Jackie.
How
Thank you for
are
having
you?
me. I'm good.
It's your first time. Thanks. It's your first time in Kigali.
Yes.
How did you love it?
Time. I love it.
You love it.
The weather is really nice. The people are nice. They are really enjoying it.
What have you done besides attending the conference? What else have you done with yourself?
Nothing really. Just between going to the KCC Center and the hotel.
No,
but I've had
lots
of interesting things to do. So
no doubt.
Hopefully next time. Yeah.
You have to visit again. Tell us a bit about yourself and what your work entails at the Development Initiatives.
Thank you, Jackie. So I'm Mariam, based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I work with the Development Initiatives. Development Initiatives is an organization that believes in the power of data to shine a light on progress and to empower people to use the data and create change and provide sustainable solution. And our mission as an organization is really around reducing poverty, inequalities, and increasing resilience. So that's what we do as an organization.
Go ahead.
As an individual, I've been in the international development space for over a decade now. Also worked in the private sector, and now with DI, as you've seen, our mission is around poverty reduction and creating that change. We cannot do it alone, so we believe in partnerships. Partnerships is at the center of what we do, and my role is to create those kind of collaborations that can bring organizations together, and we can work together towards creating that sort of change. So I lead on the regions our partnerships in the region.
So you talk about poverty reduction and empowering people. What is the connection between that and data?
So for poverty, first maybe where I should start from is that as an organization, we were one of the few voices many years ago calling to an end of poverty. And now it's, one of our sustainable development goals. It's widely recognized, so it's not that it can't be done, it's about how. And then data now plays a role in that, like looking at the progress that is being made in terms of people going out of poverty, but also to be able to understand who are the poor, where are they, how can they be targeted. Data is really important to shine a light on that. And that's where we come in as an organization, providing that data and evidence that then can empower other people to make those decisions that can impact the poorest of people.
Yeah. So I attended several sessions during Women Deliver, and there were lots of figures thrown around. Different percentages. Women, a certain percentage of women are not in business. 52% of women are in SMEs, their businesses don't grow. Such figures, okay, do you as DI go out to collect this data, or you find that 52% already there, sought by someone else?
Yeah. As an organization, we don't do primary data collection. We do analysis of secondary data. Okay. So sometimes, with data, for example, if you're looking at budgets, they are in forms that is not very accessible. So what we do, we make data much more accessible. We crunch the numbers, we do the analysis, we tell the stories around the data. So a lot of work goes behind the scenes for someone to say 52%, to say 1%. So that kind of work to come up with those statistics, and and then those statistics are used for this kind of conversations, is what we do as an organization. Yeah.
Quite interesting, because how would someone know that those figures were not cooked? Oh?
Yeah.
You say a lot goes on behind the scenes, and I have had cases where people claim they attended similar events in different years and they were given the same figures. So it's just like the same document was pulled out and cleaned and shared afresh, but nothing much really changes.
Yeah.
And this I'm asking you as a layman. I'm as green as they come as far as data is concerned. So as someone consuming this data, what do you do to make sure that I have no doubts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, data has to go through a rigorous process in terms of like quality assurance, and we have that in place with as an organization. I mean, quality is our key concern. So right from the source of the data, how you clean the data, the methodology that you use to analyze the data, there has to be quite a rigorous process that you go through, including a peer review or including external experts to check, the analysis and the reports that are coming out as a result of this. So it's about having a very rigorous methodology, but also a very clear process of quality assurance, so that at the end of the day, you know that the figures that you're using are accurate. So yeah.
Okay. How important are these figures in what's going on around us today? Because a lot is going on
Yeah.
around the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this event is actually a good example. I mean, it's the largest gender equality event that's happening in the continent for the first time. And like you've said yourself, Jackie, like a lot of numbers are being used in the conversation. And actually, personally, I was really pleased to see that. You know, one of the things that, in terms of the challenges that we have today, I mean, we're seeing an increase in poverty. We've seen, like, during the pandemic, lots of people fell back into poverty. Without data, I mean, the inequalities that we're talking about, there are lots of people being left behind, whether it's disabled, gender, the issues around gender. So data plays a key role in terms of ensuring that people are counted, but also progress is measured, and that inequalities do not increase. And we have a way of monitoring that and ensuring that there's also targeted assistance of those who are most in need, and that you need data to be able to do that. You need data to have those conversations, like people are likely to listen to you if you say, you put in the numbers to the story. It's not enough to just, we understand like there are real life stories of what's happening, but once you also complement that with what the numbers are actually saying, it creates a very compelling narrative. You're able to make your case for the change that you need. So yeah, this means that's really important.
Is this something that you always wanted to do? I'm very interested in knowing your educational background. I hated mathematics, and I want to imagine if you're in this space, then you must have gotten
Yeah.
very many A's.
I mean, for me, my motivation is in terms of my background is quite varied.
Yeah.
See, like
Share a bit of that with us.
yeah, so I'm an island girl at heart. So that means I grew up in Mombasa before going to Nairobi for my education. So I've always been about books from right when I was young. I'm quite committed, and I was lucky to have parents who are committed to education. So I did sociology, I did business administration, and also strategic management. So as you can see, it's quite
It's quite
mixed.
varied,
It's
yeah.
quite varied. And then I started off in the private sector before moving into international development. So my main motivation was actually, being part of something bigger than me and being able to create change. And I really enjoy that. I don't have to be the one who's crunching the numbers. But as our name says, it's about taking initiatives. So
Using
we
those numbers.
know, yes, so we know like for change to happen with information, you have to act on the information, right?
Yeah.
So what are the initiatives that, and how can we, come up with, how can we empower others to use that information to create change? So being in a space that allows that, whether it's now looking at policies or program, bringing different people together with different strengths, it's really one of my motivations. So the bits around collaboration, partnering for impact, partnering for solution is what I'm really passionate about. So the people aspect is just not about the numbers, it's about the people as
It's
well.
about the people.
Yes.
Yeah. The development world will often be blamed. You're big on numbers indeed and big on partnerships and collaborations. I hear, and this is not me, but word on the street, the development partners will want those numbers, yes, but the actual impact really gets down to the people that
Yeah.
all these programs are intended for.
Yeah.
Is this something that people discuss when you meet? Do you dissect the feedback that
Yeah.
comes from the people you work with?
Yes. And I think that's really important. Jackie, it's a really important point that you bring, because there's change that needs to happen in the sector. And there's a lot of conversation, around bringing in people, particularly in the local context, in terms of when you're designing program and bringing in the voices and being inclusive in our design of programs, like including women, including people with disability, the youth. So having that kind of approach is important. But I get the challenge also that sometimes, particularly depends, if you're building a road, you're building a borehole, you're providing some kind of cash assistance, you can see the change immediately, maybe in someone's life. But working on it from, the knowledge side is quite difficult, because we know that change is not a linear process. It can take a very long time for things to change, for policies to change, and for that impact to be felt, by people on the ground, and for the resources to reach the people who need it most. So that can also be a challenging aspect of the work. But of course, there are ways to work around that. If it's measuring impact, if it's, following the progress over many years, that's also something that can be done. In this conference, in the opening plenary, you could see how Dr. Is it Maliha? Yeah, Dr. Maliha, for Women Deliver, the CEO of Women Deliver. She started off by, bringing hope and saying, for the last 20 years, like this is what the numbers look like in terms of change.
This is how we have grown.
This is how we have grown. When it comes to education attainment, when it comes to child mortality, when it comes to ending child marriage. And she was saying, I've seen this in my lifetime over the 30 career that I've had from when we started off, and the difference in terms of what's happening. So that, commitment and knowing that it's a long journey, and also bringing in the voices of communities and taking that into account and making sure that, resources reach those who need it the most.
You work in different countries in East Africa. How is data helping the East African community? This data that you're working with, the data that you're talking about, how is it helping the people of the ESC? Is it improving our lives? Is it making matters worse? Because we seem to grow desperate. Okay, different situations for different countries,
Yeah.
but talk to me as a block, how we're faring.
Yeah. I mean, the challenges that I started off with the increase in inequalities, the issues around, crisis, conflict, all of that is a reality when it comes to even the climate crisis, the drought that we faced in the Horn of Africa. Like that's the reality. It's complex. There are layers of challenges. So what I can say, like linked to the previous answer, Jackie, that it's not an immediate thing. Sometimes it's also about data highlighting what the problem really is. Maybe we don't know the problem. We have these constant cycles of drought, year in, year out.
And it will never,
Yes.
we're always
Yeah.
behaving as if it's happening for the first time.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
There are no measures put in place.
Yes. So data is also a way to shine a light on, what actually is the problem. What are the questions that we should be asking? How do we bring in also citizens' views, using the data? So that's the accountability aspect of it. So that's one way. But also, in terms of, again, I talked about the measuring of progress, like within those countries. But also, we know, for example, when it comes to resource allocation. So we, in terms of financial data, been looking at the whole landscape, of resource flows within the region or globally, including, domestic budgets, like what are the trends, how is money being used, is it reaching the people that it needs to reach. But of course, there's more to be done. And there are many, many, many more actors. So I think it's about that collective collaboration, that push from citizens, push from civil society, even government. I mean, within the government, we assume that there's no willingness, but we've seen within the ESC, within IGAD.
You've seen their willingness.
Yes, the willingness to use data to improve people's lives. So it might not be something that's immediate, but it's a way to ensure that that people's needs are catered for, and there's change within the continent. Yeah.
Okay. We are on The Real Talk. We're talking to Mariam Ibrahim. She's our guest from Development Initiatives. Thank you for joining us. We're coming to you live from Mythos Boutique Hotel. When you find time, try out their corporate lunch. This is served every weekday. They are at Kiovu, and you should visit them. Atmosphere Restaurant. Welcome back. This is The Real Talk on RTV. My name is Jackie Lumbasi. Our guest is Mariam Ibrahim. Today we're talking about data. Sometimes it can get quite technical, quite heavy, and not just for you, but even for me. So let's take this as a class we are learning from Mariam. Mariam, what are some of the challenges that you face in your work?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of our work is around producing evidence. But then we know when it comes to data, like there are lots of challenges. So there's challenges when it comes to availability of data. There's challenges when it comes to disaggregation of data. If you want to look at gender, if you want to look at disability, for example, and some of the challenges also, I guess earlier on we also talked about the impact that can take a long time in terms of achieving the change that you want to achieve. And sometimes change doesn't happen or decisions are not made based on data and evidence. Like Jackie, we know like there's always politics as well that play a factor into decision making. And the way we've gone about that is that we not only, so we look at the drivers of change as three areas. One is, providing the data-driven analysis. We also seek to strengthen data ecosystem. So we want to create, to be part of like the stakeholders that work on improving the whole data ecosystem, because we know collection has to improve. The systems have to be right for us to have the data that is needed to produce evidence. So we do some mapping that involves the political economy analysis, how is data used, or when is data most absorbed by government or others, or how are decisions made, what are the gaps that exist, what are all the sources that exist, for example, in that country, what does the infrastructure look like, and that really helps in terms of like making recommendations on what needs to change, making recommendations on what are the data gaps. So even if you produce an analysis, you'll also say, these are the gaps. Maybe it's not timely, it's not up to date. Maybe the data that was used was from 10 years ago, but we're still using that, as you've said yourself, like you're still seeing the same statistics. But
exactly, over and over, yeah.
Yeah, but it's because, there's no new information.
So what causes...
Maybe it's based on census data or...
Why wouldn't we have new information? I was at an event a few months ago, and indeed, so this whole fully packed with people, intellectuals, and they're quoting a report of about 10 years ago. And I'm like, 2023, we've had a lot happen around the world, including COVID, but you're giving us a report from when? 2013. Yeah. So does that even make sense to you guys when you come out and share with an audience quote figures from 10 years ago? Yeah. What are you thinking at that time? Like, is it because you've lacked resources to find new information? There's no new data? What's happening? Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's the lack of data. And other times it's also because, for example, if you go to government and they would only listen to official data. I mean, now we're seeing in other countries the recognition, like Kenya, for example, of citizen-generated data. So it's also about the source of data, what is most likely to be accepted by your audience, for example. But I know now that with the advent of technology, it's not only about historical data. Now there's predictive data that people use in terms of like analysis, or looking forward, but also using sources that provide near to real-time data, or also using other sources that are unofficial. So civil societies have a lot of data. They work with communities, they collect data based on needs. So some of that information can be complementary when it comes to like the gaps in data.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of now a different approach in terms of sharing.
Glad you talked about that, the different approaches.
Yeah.
So once you've determined what data your audience will appreciate, what criteria do you use to pick what source you're going to use? For example, there are times when there will be a media report that places my TV station above another TV station, or one radio above the other radio. And the people that collected this data have a subscription fee that probably was paid by the person that came out number one or number two. And so the other players could say the reason we are not at the top is because we don't pay subscription fee. You know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So
Yeah.
what criteria do you use to make sure that this source or this report is not contested before you use it in front of
Yeah.
an audience that is unaware?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for us, mostly we use official data.
Okay.
So, if using
And by
official
official, you
data,
mean it will have been
government,
published
yes,
somewhere?
published, it's open,
Okay.
it's in sources that are acceptable. So that helps. But that said, there are certain criteria. I'm not specifically an expert on that or on data standards, but there are certain criteria that is also used when it comes to joining up data from different sources and making sure like that the data speaks to each other, and tells a story. So as an organization, that's also what we do, bringing together various sources, looking at quality frameworks in place. So, for example, KNBS has now a guideline in place for citizen generated data. So there's certain criteria that needs to be met for it to be seen as credible and to be recognized. So it's all about that rigor, that quality, and working with the experts, to ensure that it's credible data. Yeah,
Yeah, because
so
credibility is key.
yes, so credibility is key to, the evidence use of your data.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course you touched on the point about we also believe in open source. We've had a lot of cases where they say data is the new oil, and now it's monetized
Yeah.
and
There's
used
a cartel
differently. Yeah,
in charge of
yeah. So
data.
in data, there's questions of ethics. There's questions of data being used as power, and that's all being addressed by people working in the data ecosystem. So there's guidelines on responsible use of data, looking at how data can be used more responsibly, the ethics of data, yeah, and all of particularly now also with the technology and the advent of AI and all of that. Yeah.
The ethics of data. That's a good thing that you've mentioned. So let's come back to the ordinary person. And they have given their data to different forms online. When we go online today, there will be, before you access something, there'll be lots of questions, personal questions, requirements, personal information. Would you advise that we tread carefully when giving out this information, or would you want us to continue filling these forms because somehow they end up in your corner, and so you have access to data that you have not paid for because after all Jackie gave it free of charge online?
I think there are guidelines and laws that need to be adhered to, particularly on data privacy. I mean, even for us as an organization, we have to adhere that. There's data that, it has to be anonymized. There's certain information that cannot be shared. So it's also about respecting that when you're in the data space. So there's also regulations to adhere to. And there's lots of conversations now also around not only the ethics, but the issue around privacy as whole, as part of like the governance of data. Yeah.
Any restrictions on how this data can be used? The data that you have access to. Do you have any
Yeah.
restrictions on how it can
I
be used?
mean, the point you touched on privacy, it's important to be able to adhere to that in terms of using data. And then it also depends with the kind of like the guidelines we are given on the use of that data, depending on what kind of data that is. But that said, in terms of like our approach is to make data accessible to everyone and to improve the use of data. But it means adhering to, the regulations when it comes to data in order for that data to be used.
Do you work with individuals or governments in your line of work? Who do you work with mainly?
So we are like at the center of various organizations because our role is very like objectives. It's about data and evidence. So we'll work with governments, would work with civil society, would work with the UN agencies. So a range of organizations that can contribute to the change that we want to see and who align with our mission. Yeah.
Okay. Picture a young man or woman who has a startup or is thinking of doing something. Why should they be concerned about this conversation we are having?
Yeah. I mean,
How will data improve their lives?
yeah. I mean, it touches to, on what I said in the beginning. Every for every dollar that goes to, whether it's development, whether it's humanitarian assistance, it needs to be well targeted. And for that to be able to target the right people and to improve the lives of people, data is very important. You need data to be able to show what progress is being made. You need data to be able to target the people who mostly need the resources. So
Do
it's
I
it
need data
also
to know what course is marketable if I'm going to university?
yes,
Okay.
yes. So decisions. I mean, you need your. It's in our everyday life, right,
Looks
Jackie?
like it,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's in our everyday life. I mean, we use various data points to make certain decisions all the steps of our life. But sometimes with data, people may lack the skills or the confidence to use the data. And that's also part of like what we do to build that capacity as part of creating that culture of using data. Because you may have lots of data, but you may not use that data to make decisions. Yeah. So I think it's also important to recognize that there's also a behavior and cultural element to using data. Because decisions can also be based on emotions.
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not always based on data.
Yeah, it can be based on a range of things. So
Yeah.
it's about also encouraging that culture within organizations, within individuals, within our society as well. Yeah, because we believe data has the power to fuel that change, and it's quite a powerful tool. Yeah.
Where would someone find this data? So let's assume there's a small school that someone has started in their village and they want to compare themselves to other schools, or they want to know the number of schools that do compete against them. Ordinarily, where would they find this information?
Yeah. So That would be like, for example, with education, it will sit with, it depends with the structures within the country.
Okay.
And the official data and how accessible that is. So if you're talking about, for example, in Uganda at district level, for example, the data that sits with local government that has been collected right from the village on the number of schools and all of that. I think it's important to recognize that sometimes this data is not really available and accessible to the public. I remember like going to Mombasa and a document like the county budget that's supposed to be publicly accessible on the website. I hope now they have it. This was like years ago.
It wasn't there.
Yeah, it was not there. So sometimes the data is there, but it's not in a way that's publicly accessible. It's not in spaces that others can easily access it and use. And that's where we have a role as organizations and other actors to even support with the accessibilities of data. Like there can be lots of, even within universities, like we have rich data, but it's also about how can we ensure if someone wants to know the number of schools, as you say, that
Yeah.
information is easily
It should be
accessible.
available.
Yeah.
Between free data and paid for data, which one has more value?
They both have value, but I would always go for free
Okay.
data because I believe that data is a public good and we have the right to access the data and use the data, unless, of course, it's, you know, like private sector data, or it depends with the confidentiality of data, because commercial data can be about the competitiveness, and there's lots of things that the private sector can argue about. But generally, when it comes to like development, I really believe in open source.
Okay. What are some of the things that you're thinking of as we move forward into the future for your work? What do you foresee?
Yeah, it's a good question. And maybe my reflections are now linked to the Women Deliver conference in terms of what we've heard. So, as an organization, we are keen on stepping up our work on inclusivity. We know there's challenges there in terms of having disaggregated data. And we're keen to make sure that we expand on this work in terms of making that data accessible, telling the stories that need to be told, and putting that data and information into the hands of organizations like feminist organizations that can create that kind of change. So it's how can we do more in that space? How can we work with other experts who know more than us in those spaces that we want to go into? So driving up collaboration, driving up partnerships, looking at the intersectionality of various areas. Like the climate crisis was something that consistently
Came up. Yeah.
during this conference. So an area that we've also providing evidence, but how can we bring a gender lens to that work when we are looking at climate financing, for example? Our work on humanitarian financing that we've done, for the last 20 years. So strengthening that, the intersectionality, strengthening the gender lens in our work, driving up that collaboration is what's is top of my mind. Yeah, and I think the last thing, the last thing that I had, I think it was yesterday at one of the events, was how they said like love sometimes shows up in the form of money. Right? So funding is really
It's important.
it's an important
Money
question.
plays a very important
Plays a
role.
very important role. And we've been providing evidence on financing, particularly where is the money going to, who is it reaching, and in what form. Evidence that help with that kind of meaningful investment and ensuring that there's transformative funding in the future. Yeah.
We will be back with 6 Qs. I'll be honest with you, this is a very heavy conversation. I don't know how you're feeling, but my goodness, for me, there's just been a lot to take in. It is the real talk. We'll be back in a bit. Welcome back. Our guest is Mariam from the Development Initiatives. The 6Qs, starting with the first one. Mariam, what makes you happiest?
Morning coffee.
Morning coffee. That would make you happy. Okay. And then what would you describe as your most successful day at work?
Oh, I love it when I'm having meetings with externals and it ends with let's work together.
Let's work together.
Yes.
Yeah, when you're trying to pitch and they say, let's do this together.
Yes.
Okay. Your favorite hobby?
I'm quite boring reading.
Oh.
Yeah.
You don't do things that are all exciting. And what do you mean
Really,
boring? What do you do?
I'm an indoors person, but I enjoy the nature as well. So going for walks, the
Going for
usual
walks.
Karura, and yeah.
Oh, that's nice. You'd
Yeah.
really enjoy living in Kigali.
Yeah.
There are lots of places
Yeah,
where you
I
get
loved it actually.
long
It's so
walks.
green and
Yes.
yeah.
You should go to Nyandungu.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if money was not a problem, what would you do to cause change around the world?
Educating girls. Recently, I was asked to support to inspire girls from marginalized community. I mean, I can give my time, but if I had money, that's something that I would invest in.
You'd make sure they're all getting an education.
Yes.
And what's your favorite dish? Very interesting. Mm-hmm.
Pilau, of course.
Pilau. You said pilau, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, which pilau? Ya kuku, ya mbuzi,
Chicken, kuku.
chicken, kuku.
Yeah.
Okay, my friends here will take you to Nyamirambo, but let me warn you, pilau ya huko is not like your pilau. Hii yao ni ya food color.
Oh. Is that like pilaunjerio?
That's pilaunjeri, I promise. And lastly, between washing and cooking, what do you prefer?
Cooking, of course.
Cooking.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I love washing. Okay, washing
Wow.
utensils after someone else has cooked.
So we'll make a good partner. Yeah?
Oh,
I'll
yes.
cook, you clean. Yeah.
You'll do the cooking, I'll do the cleaning.
Yeah.
Mariam, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And we hope to see you again soon when you're back to Kigali.
Thank you, and see you soon. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having kept us company on today's episode of The Real Talk. We came to you live from Mythos Boutique Hotel in Kiyovu. You should check them out at the Atmosphere Restaurant where they serve the corporate lunch every weekday. My name is Jackie Lumbasi. We're excitedly looking forward to seeing you next week. God bless you.